What's up? Welcome back to part 2 of how I made a Black Panther pommel. I'm going to be turning this pommel from this into this super cool panther head pommel. Now let's get into it. In the last part of this build, I constructed the basic structure for this pommel, so now it's time to add all these awesome details into it. So before we add all these awesome details into this pommel, I'm gonna go ahead and take it off of the PVC pipe. That will be glued in by the end of this build, but we don't need it for right now. So this is a closer look of the basic shape of the pommel, and now it's actually time to get to sketching on this thing and putting in all of those awesome panther head details. So I'm gonna choose a side that I want as the front of the panther head, and I'm just gonna take my ruler and put a vertical line right down the middle. This will make sketching the rest of this out a lot easier, because I can use this this midline as kind of a reference point. And another thing that I want to do here is actually transfer this midline all the way around. So I'm just going to make a little notch on this side, a little notch on the top, and continue this line around the back and around to the bottom. Okay, now that I've got this line going around the entire pommel, I'm actually gonna start out on the bottom here, because the very base of the pommel needs to be only slightly larger than this hole that we have for the PVC pipe. So I'm just gonna make a little bit of a reference line on all four sides, just a little bit wider than the hole that we have for the PVC pipe here. And this is gonna give us a good reference for dremeling this down. So I'm actually going to move where these lines cross over onto the top part of this pommel. I'm gonna move all 8 of these up, and I'm gonna go ahead and transfer these all the way up. So now when I look at it from the top, the first line on either side of this midline is going to be the width of the total bottom part of this pommel. So with this line and this line as a reference for the width of the very skinniest part of this pommel, I'm gonna go ahead and start actually just sketching out the rest of this panther outline. And it's gonna be going off to the side kind of like that, mostly because the ears actually aren't gonna be right on the front, but I kind of want to sketch them where they're gonna be going, but the ears are gonna land at the widest point of this pommel. So this is pretty much the outline for one side of this panther pommel. I'm gonna go ahead and try to replicate this on the other side. All right, now I've actually transferred this sketch over to this side. Now it's actually time for me to transfer some of the face details into this. I'm starting out by marking a little mark on each one of the first 3 rings here, and just carefully transferring that over. This is a 1/4 of an inch thick for each of these lines. This is gonna make up the 3 rings at the very bottom of the pommel. Now, a lot of these details are gonna get lost as we start dremeling things down, but I really like to do a detailed sketch before getting into things, so I have a general idea of where everything needs to be, and I can always re-sketch out some of those details as needed further into this project. So I can't actually map out too many of these details, but I wanted to get the general shape of the nose bridge, the eyes, and the mouth just kind of set where they need to go. And now I'm actually ready to start dremeling this down a little bit. So I'm gonna need to make sure I have my respirator, my safety glasses, and I'm gonna break out my Dremel. And I'm actually gonna be using an extender on my Dremel, so I can move this attachment a lot easier than I can move the entire Dremel itself. It's gonna allow me to get more precise details and everything, so I'm gonna be using this attachment. But the first thing that I'm gonna be using is just a regular sanding wheel attachment on this Dremel. Now that I have my safety equipment on, I'm gonna go ahead and start at the bottom here and basically Dremel down this neck portion until it is even with the lines on the back here. All right, now I've dremeled down the skinniest part of the neck of this pommel. As you can see, it's much skinnier now, and the reason that we made the little marks on the bottom is so that I could Dremel all the way up to the marks without Dremeling too far down and keeping a nice even width. And now that I have that neck Dremeled, I'm actually going to transfer this midline down, and I'm going to be transferring these lines down. I'm going to transfer the midline from the back down as well, and those side lines. We've preserved that midline, and now I can start Dremeling the shapes going throughout here. So I'm going to try to get a nice taper, working from this point up to that point, and start trying to form the shape of this panther head. All right, now I have successfully tapered that neck up towards the base of the larger circles. Just have a nice little taper going up from the skinniest point of the neck all the way up to the bottom of the larger circles. Now I'm going to transfer that midline once again through here on the front and the back. All right, now I'm going to continue that taper up through the widest point of this outline. All right, now I've got that taper all the way up to the widest part of the outline. I'm gonna go ahead and transfer that midline once more. Now that that midline is transferred over once more, I'm gonna go ahead and follow this outline up until the base of this ear right here. So it's gonna be tapering back down through this area of the pommel. All right, and I got that taper all the way up to the base of where these ears start now. One important thing to note about this particular taper here is that if I turn it to the side here, it is less of a taper on the front and the back, and more of a focused taper on these sides. So it goes in a lot more on these sides here, and that's actually very intentional because we want to preserve more foam on the top to be able to put in all those face details that are going to sit right here. So again, I'm going to go ahead and transfer these lines down, and another thing that I'm actually going to do here is re-transfer some of those details. Now that I have those details transferred back over, I decided just to do the eyes and the nose bridge and these rings down here. Now I can start tapering this ear shape in. Okay, now I've got that tapered in as well, so I'm gonna go ahead and extend that midline back up. All right, admittedly, this guy looks a little bit goofy right now, but now it's time to really start focusing in on some of those details. So what I'm actually gonna do is look at the top, and I'm gonna make a line that's perpendicular to this other line so I can make side lines for this pommel. I'm gonna find the midpoint on this top line here. And now I'm going to extend this new line that I drew down to the bottom. And I'm going to do that on the other side now. All right, now that we have both of our side lines drawn, I'm going to go ahead and be using these side lines as a reference point for the widest part of this pommel. So right here where the widest part is, I'm going to be tapering basically from this side line in and back. I'm going to be doing the same on the widest point right at the top of the pommel. The one thing I'm actually going to do is draw those ears back on, but I'm going to draw it from that midline and not from where I had them before. These drawings really don't need to be perfect. It's more to just give yourself a gauge as to where you need to Dremel part of the top off. And Dremeling part of the top off is actually what I'm going to be doing next. So I'm going to make a line between the ear points. And essentially what I'm going to be doing is Dremeling from the tip of the ear down and across this line for basically the entire thing. But I'm going to be trying to create the shape of the inside portion of the ear on the sides here. So basically from the top, it'll go from this top in the middle all the way down to this point about right here. Now this isn't necessarily the prettiest work right here, but essentially this is going to set up where the ears need to go once this thing is finished. But as you can see, I have the general shape of the ears Dremeled in now. Now the next step for the ears is to actually mark on the sides how wide I want these ears to be. So they're gonna be pretty skinny because I mean they're ears, they're just sticking out the side. So I'm basically gonna take my Sharpie here and make kind of a general ear sketch on the sides here. That's probably a pretty decent width. I'm gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. And once I have both ears sketched on like that, The next step is actually going to be rounding out the top of the head here and basically making the front and back panels for the ears. And to make the ears a little bit easier to work with, I'm actually going to use my utility blade to make incisions for the front and backs of the ears and to kind of clear away a bunch of the excess foam. So essentially what I'm doing is making a wedge from the side of the ear into some of this excess foam, and I'm going to do that on both sides of both ears. And now that I have all 4 of my wedges cut out, I'm going to go ahead and round out this front here and smoothen up all of the backs and fronts of the ears. All right, now those ears are pretty much ready to go. Fairly skinny on the sides, but that's all right. But the general shape of the ears is now in the pommel. And I've actually rounded out the forehead part of this panther to be pretty flush with the rest of the face width. So now it's actually time to start shaping the face of this panther. So what I'm gonna do is start flattening out a part here on both sides and taper it out towards this midline where the thickest part of this pommel is going to be. So I've gone ahead and basically dug out a flat portion right underneath the ear, tapering out to this widest part of the pommel. This is going to give like the temple area of the panther head, and the eyes are going to start just outside of that. So I actually made the eyes just a bit too big on my sketch, but that's okay. That's why it's just a sketch. I can go ahead and implement some of those details more accurately after this. And speaking of the eye sockets, I'm actually going to work from the nose bridge out towards this cutout area now. So I'm basically going to make a tapered edge going from the nose bridge down and into the cheekbone, which is going to sit about right here. So I'm just going to make like a nice tapered area for our eye socket to go, but I'm going to leave that cheekbone area out just a little bit more. So I'm actually going to make a little bit of a line, a guideline for myself, basically from the tip of this nose bridge up towards the corner of the eye. I'm gonna make that on both sides. So I'm gonna make a recessed, tapered area for each of these eye sockets. And while I'm drawing things on here, I'm actually gonna draw the nose just a little bit more accurately so I know where my next steps are gonna be after this. But for right now, I'm just gonna focus on the eye socket nose bridge part. All right, I've made a recessed, tapered area right in between the nose bridge and the cheekbone for the eye socket and all those details on both sides. So I'm actually gonna draw in a temporary eye slot. So this part right here is actually gonna be more of like an eyebrow. So the eye needs to go directly underneath of it. So kind of like that. All right, I've kind of made just kind of a temporary marking for the eyes there. And now I need to draw in where the panther's lips are gonna go and the mouth. So they kind of puff out over here and come back in. And the mouth is actually gonna go kind of down here like this, just before these rings. I make sure it's even on both sides. So now what I need to do is actually taper from the midline on the sides here in towards these shapes and up towards this cheekbone area. All right, now the highest points that we're left with are this nose bridge as well as the mouth. Went ahead and tapered in from these midpoints right up to the mouth outline and all the way up to this cheekbone. And now what I really want to do is actually get the forehead shape. So there's a wrinkle on the nose bridge right between the eyes, like right there. So what I need to do is actually taper the nose bridge in up until that line and then taper the forehead up from that line. So I'm going to go basically from this line up to this line, and I'm going to be cutting it in just a little bit. And if I need to adjust any of the eye sockets, I will. So I've tapered the forehead so that it's much more rounded. And this nose bridge, I think I'm actually going to have to make out of foam clay as well as the lips and mouth portion. Mostly because I don't think I'm going to be able to get the level of detail that I need by sanding like this. So rounding out that forehead and making a nice spot for some foam clay for this nose bridge is actually going to be the last thing I'm going to be doing with the sanding wheel attachment for right now. I'm going to need it a little bit later to kind of round out the back a little better. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and switch out the sanding wheel attachment. And I'm going to be using this cone attachment for my rotary tool. So what I'm going to be doing with this cone attachment is detailing out the eyes some more, as well as the ears. And I'm also going to be getting into some areas that were very hard to get into with the sanding wheel attachment, and just kind of smoothing them out. Alright, so with that cone attachment, I was able to get that divot in the ears, as well as kind of outline the eyes a bit better. Before we move on to the next steps, I think this is a really good time to go ahead and sand everything with some sandpaper. So I actually have 5 different grits of sandpaper right here, starting with 220, going to 320, then to 400, then 600, then 1000 grit. I'm basically just gonna give this a once over and sand down any of the imperfections that I can with some sandpaper. This process will give us a lot smoother area to work with when we start burning in some of these details. So I'm gonna start with the 220 grit sandpaper. All right, then I'm gonna hit it with the 320 grit, then 400, then 600, then 1000 grit. Now that I've hit it with all 5 levels of that sandpaper, look how much cleaner this thing looks. It just really smoothed out a lot of those imperfections and brought out a lot more of the details that we put into it. And at this point, I'm gonna put this to the side. I'm gonna clean up my workstation and myself, and I'm actually gonna bring out some foam clay. All right, now that everything is mostly cleaned up here, I've got my panther head, and I have some foam clay. I also have a little cup of water over here because this stuff, you can smooth it out really well with just a little bit of water. And I have a variety of sculpting tools. I'm probably gonna use a couple of these to get some of the details into the foam clay that I want, but I'm definitely not gonna be using all of them. And the last thing that I want here is to actually put down a bit of wax paper, just so I don't get any foam clay really like sticking to this mat or really anything that I don't want it to. So I'm just gonna be sculpting on this wax paper. So I'm really not gonna need much foam clay for this. I'm just gonna get a little ball, just like this, kind of work it around in my hands just a bit. I'm gonna take a piece of that ball and form it right on the crease of this nose bridge and just bring it out slightly. So I'm just gonna shape this with my fingers for now. I'm gonna get it about the width that I need. I'm gonna put just a little bit of water on my finger and just smooth out the flat areas. Kind of smooth it into the foam a little bit. And if you're doing this right after you're dremeling like I am, you're gonna get some of the residue from the Dremel dust into the foam clay. It's perfectly fine. It'll be nice and smooth. It's just gonna look a little bit speckled. Now I'm gonna take a little bit more of this clay, basically form the cheeks or lips or what have you of this panther. I'm just going right over top of that piece of foam that's still nice and smooth, right below this. I'm gonna take a little bit of water on my finger and smooth those right out. Make sure it leaves a nice little midline there. This is actually where I'm gonna break out a couple of the sculpting tools. I'm gonna start out with this one with kind of a chisel tip on it, but it's nice and flat right in the middle. It's a nice little silicone tip. What I'm gonna do is probably get it a little bit damp and then work in some of these creases. So I'm gonna get the clay damp throughout those areas, and then I'm gonna form those crease lines in between the nose and the cheeks and right down that midline. I have a nice little midline, and there's a crease between the cheeks and the nose. So the last piece that we need to actually sculpt here is gonna be the mouth portion. So I actually really don't need that much clay for this, just a tiny little ball like that. And I'm just gonna stretch it to the size of this lower lip / mouth portion. A little bit of water and smooth that right out. And there we have the open panther mouth. I actually ended up using this sculpting tool, which has a little bit of a curve to kind of shape the cheeks here. So I could literally just bring it from this part up, and it would keep a nice curve the entire time I was trying to smooth it out. But it actually looks like there's a tongue in there as well. So what I'm going to do is take a very small piece of foam here and try to kind of form it into a tongue outside of the panther head here, and then I'll stick the whole thing into the panther head. I'm just kind of flattening it kind of to a pretty thin point. This is probably going to be too long, but I'm going to go ahead ahead and put in some of these details. Looks like there's a couple ridges in this tongue. So I'm just gonna take this pointier sculpting tool and kind of work in a couple of ridges. I'm just gonna carefully peel this from the wax paper. I'm just going to place this directly into the mouth of the panther. Get a little bit of water on this tool here. I can just kind of place the tongue into the mouth. All right, and that is nice and in there now. So by looking at the reference picture, it actually looks like there might be a couple of teeth sticking up from either side of the tongue. They are super teeny tiny. So I'm gonna take the smallest bit of foam clay that I can. I'm just gonna kind of roll it on the wax paper, and I'm gonna form a cone out of this wax paper. And then I'm going to just kind of chop the tip of the cone off. And now I have a little piece of foam clay that I'm gonna go and stick to one side of the tongue. I'm gonna do the same on the other side as well. And just like that, all the sculpting is complete on this. As you can see, we have the nose bridge as well as the cheeks and the bottom portion of the mouth, which is open with the tongue and the teeth in it. You can actually see how tiny those teeth are here. But I do need to do one more thing with the clay. That is actually put in a little bit of texture onto the cheeks and onto the nose bridge itself. So I need to make it kind of look like it's furry just a little bit. So I'll put in a little ridge here, a couple of lines or divots going through the nose bridge. And then on the sides, I basically just need to texture it up a little bit with this sculpting tool. Make it look like there's some fur on this foam clay. And you can really see the texture that I put in through there. And once I'm done with that, I actually need to do a little bit more sanding right on the back. Just kind of smooth all of this out, make it into a nice even line. As you can see right here, it's kind of flat right there and then kind of dips in. So I just kind of want to smooth this part out a little bit and smooth this part out a little bit. And once I've dremelled a better line, I'm just gonna hit it with those 5 different grits of sandpaper again, and that's much better. So the very last thing that I'm gonna need to do before I can consider this fully constructed is to actually burn in some details into this foam. So like the eye sockets, the ears, the fur texture, things like that. And I'm gonna be using this soldering iron for that. I have a couple different tips here that I can switch out to get better shapes. And I'm actually gonna be using this really fine point to get most of these details in. You wanna make sure that your soldering iron or your wood burner is hot enough so that no weird streaks appear when you're trying to burn into foam. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a little test piece right here with some scrap foam. And that is a nice clean line. So I know that my tool is hot enough to put in the details that I need on this pommel. Just like that, the eye socket has been burned in. Got both eyes burned in. Now I'm gonna start working on detailing out these ears a little bit, kind of texture the inside of them and define the outside lines a little bit clearer. I'm also going to burn in the rings at the bottom, do a nice consistent line. Got both of those rings at the bottom set in there now. And now what I need to do is basically just cover this thing in a fur-like texture. So I'm just gonna take my soldering iron here and make a bunch of small lines pretty much all over this entire piece. All right, I have textured both sides of this pommel head here. You can see the entire thing is covered with tiny little marks, and it looks like the panther head has a lot of fur on it. Now there is one final thing that I really would like to do, and that is actually rounding out these rings at the bottom. So essentially what I'm gonna do is break the Dremel back out and just kind of round out these edges here. And then I'm gonna take this cone attachment again, kind of wedge it between each of these lines so that it rounds both sides around both of these lines. All right, now I got those guys kind of rounded out a little bit. I'm gonna hit it with some sandpaper, and then this thing is pretty much done. All right, once those edges are nice and smooth and everything is rounded out, this pommel is 100% constructed. This guy's not ready to paint, but let me give you a quick 360 here so you can see all the cool details that are on this pommel. And there you have it. That was how I made this super awesome Black Panther Pommel. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this one. Also, if you want to see me working on any crafting projects like these live, check out my Twitch channel. I do all of my cosplay builds on there, and I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But I hope you enjoyed this build video. I know I enjoyed every second of building this thing and showing it to you guys. But please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.